Paul, Linda.
Hey, you ready for finance committee?
Wait, which Danny?
Danny Phelan.
I didn't try.
Wow.
Oh, I love it. Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any nays? Okay, moving on. We have approval of minutes, November 28th, 2023, January 3rd, 2024, and February 27th, 2024. Can I get a motion, please?
Yeah, I know.
Okay, Bill, Linda. Are there any changes or comments? Okay, all those in favor? Aye. Any nays? Informational items, monthly financial report.
Hello everyone.
Hello.
Hi. This is probably the most exciting financial report that you guys will probably get from me in fiscal year. It's December's, we're not quite there. Okay. We're not quite at the audited financial statements, but this gives a pretty good picture of where we'll end up the fiscal year. So going through, we went through a few of the items, and I have some items I want to pull to your attention, both from fiscal year 23 and how it relates to FY 24. So the first one I'm going to talk about, which is probably the one that's been a drum roll of what everyone's been waiting for, is what's going to go to the long-term care services fund. And right now, as anyone can remember, back in 23, in December 23, you guys did a policy to approve 50% of the general fund surplus to go to long-term care. So the policy states that we will do this in period 13. So this will impact the annual financial report, but we won't have the final number for about 4 to 6 weeks until we get every single entry in and ready to actually do the report. So just when we start to actually present the annual financial report, the number that's in here to the number that's in there is going to be slightly different because of the 50%. So that number, we have about 3.2 million as an estimate that's going to go to that fund. So that's great. So we're estimating that in FY 24 midsummer, the long-term care services fund should be positive. That's because of this, plus the money from the auditor's office that was limited by referendum, plus the property taxes that will start to come in come this summer. That was about $1.7 million that the board said that we're going to be putting towards that fund. So that's good. That fund should start to receive interest. And typical with every year, the staff will midsummer also bring a resolution or a recommendation, usually with county board action, to do the rest of the surplus fund. So that other 50%, there'll be sometime midsummer, will be a recommendation. That's not in this report, but I just want to give you guys a heads up. So next we're going to talk about revenues. And in revenues, we have 3 different categories that I'm going to touch briefly on. The first is property taxes, then intergovernmental revenue, and last. First, in property taxes, we had 30.3 million. And what is different with FY23 from FY24 is we actually aligned FY24's budget to better match. So when we have the FY24 property taxes, that will match the levy. And then in the FY23 number, we have about $1 million in fines that will actually be reallocated to the fines line because there are fines on property taxes, so we're going to better allocate that. So moving forward, what is in the property tax amount should match the levy. And then for intergovernmental revenue, so intergovernmental revenue is mainly any money from either federal grants, state grants, or any revenues distributed to the county by the state. So that's excluding the public facilities and public safety tax and a couple of those other taxes that the county is collecting based off of policy, not necessarily with the state. So this intergovernmental bucket is really just that. So supplemental sales tax, regular sales tax, PPRT. So in those, there's two categories that impacted this intergovernmental revenue. As you can see, there's quite a big difference between what we budgeted to what was actual. There's two impacts for that. The first is for ARPA, which, as we've discussed in the past, ARPA revenues match ARPA expenses. So that really has a net impact of 0. There is a $2.3 million of fund balance that has been accumulated in that fund, and that's primarily interest, and that's what the board can spend at its discretion. But that's in another category. So the intergovernmental revenue that's lower, it really has no impact to the budget. The one that does is PPRT, and that revenue has been high, and it's gradually going to continue to decrease. From what I can read in IML, I estimate about where we were pre-2021, pre-COVID levels. We had $15.8 million in 22, 13.1 in 23, and in FY24 we're at 9.1. So I think they'll continue to decrease just a little bit more. Again, no one has a crystal ball, although I do on my desk.
There you go. Please use it.
Hopefully we can use it in FY25. So that's just something that we have to think about as we go into the FY25 budget, where that number is going to go and how that's going to impact what Scott can recommend. So again, an intergovernmental, one decrease from the revised budget. It's not impacting the budget, and the other one is the PPRT. Last for revenues is interest income. We budgeted, at the time we put the budget together, we sometimes do our best estimates, and then life happens when there's a huge difference. So in FY23, during the time of budget, which is in the summer of 22, we estimate about $406,000 countywide in interest income. Well, we actually received, thanks to Nicole's and interest rate, about $7.25 million in interest income. So even just from 22 to 23, that's a $5.9 million increase, or about 400%, 440%. So that's great.
Does that include ARPA?
That includes what is in
Interest off of
ARPA. I didn't do fund specific, I did more county. Yes.
So what can all that money be?
For ARPA?
No,
Oh.
interest that we got on. We said ARPA could be used
At
at
its
board's
discretion.
discretion. What about the rest of it?
So that's a great question. So any interest that is within the general fund, I believe by board policy, it can be spent anywhere. Any interest received in any fund that's already restricted still has those same restrictions. So if money is received in MFT, we can't take that MFT money and spend it elsewhere. So the restrictions are still based off of which fund receives that money. That's all I have on revenue. Any more questions before we go? Okay. Expenditures. So I want to point out that each annual budget, at least since I've been here, the practice has been that when we present the budget, each position in each department, if that position was there before, is budgeted January through December, assuming that it's going to be there. Sometimes there's cases where we have a grant funded position where it's only going to be a short period of time, or maybe there's an increase because we have a short period of time in which a position will be needed to cover a potential retirement coming up. So there are some other variances. Otherwise, the position is budgeted for the whole year, and that includes health insurance. So I want to kind of bring down, what does that mean then at the end of the year? You know, we have all this large expense, but does all that money get spent? Well, the answer is no, it doesn't. So in FY23, we had original adopted budget of $57.5 million in expenses for personnel. So that's wages and health insurance. But we only had $52.8 million in actual expenditures. So that's really a difference of about $4.7 million that was never spent. So then for the revised budget, this includes money that departments can move out of personnel. So if money goes into personnel, it's only by board approval. I can't approve a transfer to go from commodities to fund a new position without approval. So, but you can move money out per policy. So with the revised budget, we had 56.5 million in expenditures with that 52.8 million in, 56.5 in the budget with the 52.8 in expenditures. So that's about a $3.7 million savings, so money that's going to just go back in and not be spent. So this is not a standalone year. In FY22, we had a similar delta. So the revised budget was 55.6 million, and we only spent 51.1. So there was about 4.5 million gap. And then to kind of give another analysis from FY22 to FY23, there's only increases in salaries of 3.23% in expenditures. So that means with all the changes in health insurance, the union increases, all the changes, the actual expenditures personnel really only went up. So with all the union, I think that's pretty much in line with what we would be expecting. So we just want to point that out. Outside of personnel, their only other category that we want to bring attention to is capital outlays, and that, which will be a report later in this month, or sorry, today, not this month, is the capital, which we had about a 234% increase, $11.75 million in expenses from last year. The major expenses, we had the Health and Human Services. I feel like we're being a broken record, but Health and Human Services, we did the roof replacements at the county courthouse and the jail and the JDC, road improvements, we did the pool improvements, you guys just toured, IT and the public defender space, and then we also put money into the county highway. So in FY24, we have about 16 million in original capital expenditures, but with Peoria rollovers and the amendment last month, there's more in capital. So that aligns with your initiative for infrastructure improvement. So one final item to note is that we had $1.2 million in transfers that we were going to move money from ARPA to the health department, the Peoria County Health Fund, and that was going to be for the social determinants of health. There was not any expenditures in FY23, so that was reappropriated. And in FY24, we have a total of $2.4 million for that, for social determinants of public health. And so that is $1.2 million from the county's portion, from ARPA, and then from the city. So those were the highlights that Heather and I put together for discussion today. If you have anything else, happy to answer any questions.
When are the outside auditors going to be here?
That's a great question. They will be here the April 8th, right?
The week of the 8th for 3 weeks, but they'll be here Tuesday through Thursday.
They usually schedule about 4 weeks, but we've been historically doing 3 weeks, so they just scheduled 3 weeks this year, so let's do it again.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you. Heading to notes financial.
You have in your packet the balance sheet and the accounts receivable through December of 2020 heading notes. So if you have any questions, I can answer those.
So I have a question about the long-term care fund. We just got a great report from Julie on that. What's your projected at this point, obviously, since we're putting so much towards the long-term care fund, what's your projection of when we'll have the money to pay off the bonds?
So, I ran the cash flow analysis based on the estimated 3.2 million. I actually just put 3 million in it just to be safe, to be conservative. And it looks like the fund balance will hit the $11,075,000 mark in 2030, so 2 years earlier than what we had anticipated with this large amount. And that's keeping all the other factors the same, with about $100,000 surplus in general fund going forward. So it's real conservative. So it could be earlier than that, but again, we have to let it sit there until the bonds are callable in 2032, but that just speeds up our timeline a little bit.
Thank you for that. Any other questions? Paul?
What can we do with, let's say we hit in 2030 or 2028, and we're getting interest on that. But we don't need that to pay it off. What can the interest be?
So anything in the long-term care services fund can only be spent on long-term care services related items. So currently we have the contract with the Center for Prevention of Abuse for the long-term care ombudsman program. So initiatives like that or anything else that the future board would be, we want to put that towards.
I think I sort of had a similar question about that. I don't think I explained it well enough for you to understand where I was going with that. But once we have the money put away, obviously some of the stuff that we've decided to do, like half of the leftover is going to go, towards those. But I guess my question is the tax levy. So are we required to have that tax levy as long as those bonds are still out there?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, any other questions? Okay. Moving on, we are at February 2024 accounts payable review.
Okay, so you have a very thick printout or handout in your iPads. If you have any questions on any of the expenditures, I'm happy to try to answer them.
Heather, perfect. So when I went through February's reports, I'm not saying that I'm opposed to us purchasing food, but there seemed to be on the food portion multiple $500 to Bonnie's, multiple over $500-$600, just P cards that don't even tell us what for. A lot of those were in the general fund. The courts looked like they had like a $2,000 or $1,500. You had Hy-Vee, you had Avani's. We had like a $400 to Mission Barbecue. And one of the, it's great, but when you see the peak cards, and I'm not looking to micromanage, but when it's under food and beverage for over $500, I trust your office is reviewing it, making sure that it's within expenditures, but as the general public looking at that, I'm just trying to understand. It seems like food and us purchasing outside food for catering has really started to uptick.
Rob actually called me about that this morning. So Heather, do you want to address how that all kind of happens
Sure.
in your department?
Sure. So the county doesn't have, outside of a travel policy, there's no policy on food-related expenses within departments. So, some of them on this report are for, let's say, holiday celebrations, department holiday celebrations, but there are obviously many others on there too. So our travel policy is per IRS guidelines. We do per diem or up to the amount of the GSA rate for if someone's traveling, but a lot of these are not for traveling, they're for meetings, that type of thing. So there's no official county policy that says what you can and cannot do. It's kind of, so how a transaction happens is department staff will either put an invoice in. So for one of the catering events, they'll put an invoice in and then the department head approves it and it routes to the finance department. If it's like something that seems a little off or doesn't have a lot of doesn't have a business purpose associated with it, we'll reach out to that department and get information or details from them. And as long as it's in alignment with current county policies, we'll process the payment through. For P cards, there's no, it's a similar process. There's no like pre-approval that happens. It's after the fact, and then it'll go through. There have been very few instances, at least in my tenure here, where we've had somebody repay, like reimburse. There have been very few of those, but they do happen if they don't have all the documentation they need, or if it's something that isn't in alignment or over the policy amount.
Because I can understand like the time where the sheriff had to buy pizzas for people on the rescue crews and stuff. It just seems like this month for some reason, there's one in here for Casey's for $131 under food. Like, what are we purchasing at Casey's?
Pizza, probably.
But it's still,
That you'd wanna eat.
I mean,
Their pizza's good.
well, I think, and I'm okay if like it's coming out. I think there was like one time there was Monica had brought in like breakfast pizzas or whatever from whatever. It just seemed like this month's food bills were really off the charts, and we're not necessarily looking at. I mean, I've catered plenty of lunches. I can go either pay somebody to do it, or I can go to Costco and get trays. And there's getting trays from Costco for lunch, which are nice croissant sandwiches, are way more fiscally responsible than having something else. I just was curious.
What's the IRS's policy on food
So
purchases?
these are from a few years ago when I worked at Bradley, and we went by the IRS guidelines, which so any meeting that you host, as long as it is irregular and infrequent, you can host food at the meeting. So if you have, like, if we were going to have a monthly finance committee meeting and we had food at every month, that would not be in alignment with the IRS guidelines. If we did it like once a quarter or once a year or something like that, then that would be within the guidelines, as long as it's not regular or frequent.
It still has to be approved by a department, or there's still a sign-off and approval process, right? Every one of these has to be signed off.
Right, so any invoice that comes through our office has to be approved by either the department head or a supervisor within the department through the new accounting system that we have. Same with P card statements, they have to approve purchases.
As I have said in the past, I am very concerned about P cards. I just do.
Me too.
And, you know, to me, it's not, it's traceable. So that's just my thoughts. Anybody else have any comments?
I'm sorry.
I just want to say it stood out to me just because I worked in government for almost 30 years, and not once in my lab has taxpayers paid for a meal for me. Not one time. Our holiday parties, I mean, our meetings, anything is all, we throw in $5 for something. So I'm not saying, I agree with Jimmy, I'm not saying that we need to micromanage and say that no, absolutely none. But I do think, I was going to ask to see if there's a possibility that we can just see what the last 6 months was, a report, if we could just sort this by account description, by food and beverages, I guess with Sharon's permission, just to kind of get an idea of what the last 6 months look like.
Okay, any other questions? Yeah.
I just want to say, from what I'm hearing, it sounds like maybe we need to review what the process is for food purchases, and what do we, I guess, question whether we need a policy or to refine our policy.
Maybe that with the report that Heather and her team will prepare, we can make decisions from that. How does that sound?
Can you, I couldn't quite hear all what Jennifer was saying, what you're.
Oh, I was saying maybe or Sharon said maybe we can take the report Rob requested. I had asked, do we need to look into whether we need to refine the policy we have or what the process is? So put those
I like
together.
Your question.
Yeah.
You had.
Yeah, and what Heather is gonna prepare for us, then we can make some decisions based on that, information.
And I know everything is signed off on, and maybe these are coming from Christmas. I do think there's some value in morale if you had a holiday party and some of that other stuff. So I'm not saying I'm opposed to it. It just seemed like this month, for some reason, really jumped off the.
I agree.
I do think it's a cheap way to improve morale, particularly if people are stuck doing some kind of heavy lifting. I mean, we've demanded it for long executive sessions, right? So it would still be a good use of money to feed your staff periodically when there's something rough going on.
And in most of the places, we're at reasonable accommodations, like in Avani's or
Yeah, they're not going to Lariat or something.
That wasn't Saffron Social for
Yeah.
$1,000 on the thing. So
Linda, do you have a comment?
Well, I've worked in government even longer than Rob, and never once have we spent a dime on food. Never. And I don't think
if free dinners here.
well,
We have long
I said
meetings.
we didn't. But I think that people need to be more careful. It's not like private business where you can make that decision every day. We're spending somebody else's money.
Okay. Any other comments, questions?
I had one more question, but
Yeah, go ahead.
not on that. I think this is probably a Scott question. There was the license for lifting up. I think that's for the small business, the dashboard.
Yeah.
That was paid out of ARPA for $25,000. Is that something that will be reoccurring after ARPA has been extinguished?
That'll be a policy decision for the board as to whether or not you want to continue that.
Is that for the small business?
Yeah, that's this. It's the
software.
the software for
Smart
the
Start.
Smart Start. Yeah.
That's an annual. I do remember.
But our
we-
contract's 3 years, 2 years. So I mean, there's a. We will need to decide as a board if we want to
I guess
continue paying it.
what all comes with the $25,000? That just seems like a lot for an annual software.
It's I can show you the software, but they
Yeah.
basically have a database, or pardon me, a dashboard where they can go in, answer questions about how their business is, and link up to mentors. And then behind the scenes, there's people who contact them, help them through the process. There's able to access mentors and other things through it. So to me, 25,000 seems reasonable.
It covers
It's-
all of that.
Yeah, and it's and then we. If you remember, to get the grant, you have to get a certain amount of, you have to get vetted, right? So you get these check marks. They're also tracking those for us. And so that's how we know that the person is now authorized to go for the grant. So it seems reasonable to me.
Any other questions? FY '23 and prior to FY '24 purchase order encumbrance rollover.
Okay, so the next item in your packets, if you will recall, last year when we implemented our new ERP software, with the process changed from how Penimation, our prior software, allows us to do rollovers for purchase orders. So we brought a policy change forward to the board, you approved it, and this is our first year implementing it. So we included that in the packet so that you can refresh your memory, because that happens in a year. So this list, we generated it after the fiscal year end close on March 15th, which was successful. We were very happy about that. Julie and Kim did an excellent job. Everything wrapped up. After the close, the list was generated. We provided that to Administrator Sorrell. He reviewed it and approved it, and this policy gives him the authority to move all of those forward. There's about $18.9 million in rollovers, PO rollovers, which a little over 14 million of those were from ARPA. So that was a majority of it. And if there's detail in the packet, if you have questions on any specific ones.
Any questions? Okay. Peoria County capital projects, funding sources and progress.
Okay, so we thought it would be beneficial to provide a document to both the infrastructure committee on a monthly basis with all of the many capital improvement projects that we have going on at the county. So in your packet, you'll see a new report. It has the project and initiative, the funding source or sources listed next to it, what has been spent on that project in fiscal years 22 and 23, and then in fiscal 24 to date. It has what was budgeted in this fiscal year and everything that was rolled forward for a total revised budget for fiscal 24. And then in the second to the last column on the right, the total budgeted amount for the project. And then the progress of the project to date. So some of these are almost to completion next month. For example, the IT and public defender remodel, that should all be paid off, so that'll be 100% complete, but we'll leave it on the report just so that we can track what is going on. So if you have, I know this is the first time for this report, if you have questions or feedback or suggestions on other information that you'd like to see, please let us know. Obviously, we're running out of space, but we can print it on bigger paper.
So I asked this in committee yesterday, Phil's committee, about our little projects for the board to determine in FY24. Scott, you want to talk about that? It's $955,000.
Happy to, Madam Chair. So if you're looking at the report, which is on, again, the last page of your packet, it's near the bottom of the report. As Chairwoman said, it's $955,000 and change. After all the projects that you've appropriated to be spent from the ARPA fund, that is what's left over from what we received from the U.S. Treasury. It'll be a policy decision of the board we'll do a discussion at executive committee, because that's where ARPA goes through based on your rules to determine how you want that allocated. It could go towards capital improvements. It could go towards economic development. It could go towards broadband. It could go to a whole host of things that are eligible expenses under the American Rescue Plan Act and the guidance that the Treasury has issued and actually continues to refine at least once a quarter, if not more frequently. So as we prepare for that, Heather and I will create a list of eligible expenses, so how we're able to use it, and then provide some recommendations on how we think it might best be used. At Infrastructure Committee yesterday, there was a brief conversation by those committee members on how it might be allocated, and I'll let Chairman Dillon, instead of putting words in his mouth, I'll let him share his thoughts that he shared yesterday in terms of what his initial thoughts are. But expect probably either at next month's executive committee or the following month's executive committee, we'll bring forward some information and a recommendation on what to do with that last $955,000.
So you and I have had a discussion about broadband. Do you want to give people a nugget about what's happening?
Happy to do that. Do you want me to do that now first, or do you want to take any other questions about this report?
Okay, we'll take questions first, but then we'll come back to that. Jimmy?
So what I said yesterday was, out of that, obviously, Dr. Blair had made a request for another funding source to grow new businesses. But for those of you that aren't on facilities, what was the number? We have 3.5 or 5 million for the highway department, Maxwell. About 4 million, which was always kind of a plug-in number, and I've never really expected for what we were all asking for that to accomplish there, for that to be the number. So just expecting for the board to expect, we were probably on some of that, always have to find some money to fill that plug for that. So just wanted everybody to be aware that what we have budgeted currently for that Maxwell station is not going to be enough. So there is going to be either needs from this money, and I'm not saying that that's what that money, that's a board policy, but we will have to find money to accomplish that goal. Just so that's not a surprise to anybody The initial estimates were really high for that project. We think they were much lower than what those initial estimates would be, but just wanted to throw that out there that what we have budgeted for that was never going to be enough for what we were asking for design.
Are there any other comments regarding this report?
And my request is for 50,000, so. it's not-
And so to be clear for Member Blair's request, you've appropriated all of your ARPA dollars. This last 955 is how you actually want to use it. There still is money in the economic development bucket of our ARPA allocation that is unspent that we can draw that second 50,000 from and not impact this 955.
What was the number for the plaza refresh? Was it? Yeah.
Several million. I
7
mean, like, it's probably 3.
Okay. And that's not on, we don't have that funded in any way.
That is not currently funded, correct.
Okay. Any other questions or comments?
Well, I'm not sure where Rob is going with that, but I really think that we need to do something in addition to what we have planned, if possible, to make the courthouse look a lot better to the public, both inside and out. And I can't quite figure out how we're gonna fix the fountain for $30,000.
So that, Member Daly, that is just doing some plumbing work in the pit where the pump is located. The pump needs to be replaced, and there needs to be some plumbing work that needs to be done. That doesn't cover, completely redoing the plaza, as some of you have talked about. There is money appropriated in this year's capital budget to make significant changes on this block. The exterior of this building needs to be power washed and sealed. That's a project that's been appropriated. Included in that is also, where needed, to re-caulk and seal windows. There's money appropriated to repair the stone steps that are at the Main Street entrance, and the $30,000 for the to get that pump. It's probably not a repair. It's probably a replace, not a repair.
Which fountain is
But
that?
that's-
That would be the one in the back.
Because that's like no real water. It's like paint it blue and make sure the pump works. I mean,
Yeah, so that really, so if you're out in the plaza, you'll see near the fountain, probably a 3 foot by 3 foot stainless steel cover. That opens a door to a room that has all the electronics and plumbing for that fountain area. And that's where we've got equipment that needs to be either replaced or more replaced versus repaired. If you look really closely at the fountain itself, you'll see we have some steel plates around in various portions of the plaza floor. Under those plates, the limestone has completely disintegrated, and those are trip fall hazards if we didn't have those plates in place. So part of, not covered in any of the projects that have been appropriated, but part of restoring the lower plaza is replacing some of that limestone, which will be very expensive to do, because that'll be all handwork that has to be done. We did have, several years ago, we had an estimate to remove the bluestone and then actually put back concrete. And that number is pre-COVID, so imagine what it'll be today. But that was $1 million just to do that.
Any other questions or comments? So I just want to say, I continue to be impressed with the work that the finance department is doing. I really appreciate reports like this. You know, it helps board members really delve into the information and understand where we're spending taxpayer money. So I do appreciate you and your staff. So, any other comments?
I second that.
All right, Madam Chair, on the broadband question, we put an RFP on the street for us to use some of the broadband dollars that you had appropriated as a match to private sector internet service providers, a match for if they were going to be going after any state and or federal grant dollars to expand their network. All internet service providers in the county were invited. We received 3 proposals. All 3 of them were from Comcast for different geographic areas of the county. The first one, and they kind of did 3 bands that go from east to west across the county, one in the northern, one in the central, and one in the southern portions of the county. The northern band is roughly from the Chillicothe municipal boundary going west towards Princeville. It is the largest area. They literally copied and pasted what our feasibility study said. The second one is kind of along Route 8 in general terms. And then the third one is kind of running from Bartonville to Glassford, not down along Route 24, but more kind of along the boundary line between the 2 southern townships of Hollis and Timber, all across their northern boundary line. So they would be touching Limestone and Logan and Rosefield townships, if my geography is correct, for that southern line. And those 2, the middle one and the southern one, are much smaller in size in terms of the number of households that they would be serving. The way that we set it up, the match is capped at a percentage of their required match for the grant program, and we are evaluating those proposals. We expect to bring them forward at next month's round of committee meetings for award. Being they're ARPA funded, they'll come to executive committee. The dollars that we would invest there would allow us, should you approve them, would allow us to do a second round of RFPs if the board wanted us to continue using those dollars for that purpose. So what that means is we're not going to exhaust all the ARPA dollars in this first round that you've dedicated to broadband. We did get some feedback from some of the other providers in the community. One provider said that they don't have any more capacity to take on more projects, so they did not respond. We had one provider tell us that they're waiting to hear if they are successful with their state grant application, which really didn't make a lot of sense to me because Comcast is in the same grant application process and they submitted proposals. And then we had a third provider say that they did not want to, even in a confidential manner in which we set it up, they did not want to disclose any of the financial condition of the company. In RFPs like this, we do require companies to confidentially disclose their financial condition because we do not want to bring forward to you, and we would recommend against doing business with a company that is not financially healthy. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Okay, thank you for that. Okay. We are at resolutions, which we don't have any. Is there any public comment? Any miscellaneous? Bill?
Well, I'm probably speaking for myself most of all, but I don't see why we can't have our committee meetings back in our regular meeting room. It is difficult to hear many of you speak. You say, well, Salzer, get a hearing aid. But anyway, we've got our IT guy right here. If we have a problem in there, he's right here to help us. And sometimes the people who don't project themselves all the way down to one end, I should sit in the middle. I can't hear you sometimes, and I'm glad Paul asked for that question to Jennifer. But I'd like to see us go back in the regular.
And I have two.
But I can't hear anything in that room because I sit right by the air vent in there. So maybe we go back to having microphones or something. I don't know if there's a possibility.
We can't have microphones in here.
We used to.
Yeah.
Did we?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, pre-COVID, but we did have them.
Steve?
But I'm just, I'm suggesting that. It's a selfish reason to me, but
I'm just sitting here.
what?
It's so you can hear.
I heard Heather and Julie well, but I'm only sitting 10 feet away from you. I did hear Scott very plainly because Scott projected, and some of you may be turned away from us. It is difficult. If you remember, Madam Chairman, yesterday the first question you raised was the fact that I didn't speak loud enough.
You didn't have your microphone on.
I didn't have my microphone on, and you couldn't hear what I was saying and so forth. And I knew if we went back in there, we'd have our microphones. Maybe you could sit away from where you have to sit. Dr. Blair.
And I've had to move in that room. But yeah.
Steve?
Since we're in the miscellaneous, under legislative, can we get a status update on where our contract is with our federal lobbyist and our next action plan to, I think someone was boldly threw a date of Memorial Day to have this thing, have a well-defined plan in place, working and running. I'm a clock guy, so the clock's getting closer to Memorial Day than it should be.
Great question. Contract has been executed, and we were actually trading dates yesterday to try and find a time that we could start kick off that process. That'll some were point in that process. Obviously, they will be physically here to meet and engage with us. But there will be other steps in that process where it'll be more online and remote.
I suppose that maybe as we get moving along into that process, I don't know if it's quarterly, this committee would give updates or whatever, so it's a living, breathing thing versus a once a year, where we at?
On that note, so we were talking about budgetarily being able to send some members out for the fly-in to do that. Unless I hear any objections to, I'd also talked to Scott about, basically we've budgeted where it's been about 2 to go to DC and 2 to go to the summer conference. And with the active board that we have and the education experiences that they provide for the budget in the years going forward, I've asked to see, I'm not saying like we do like Lake County and send the entire board to go to it, but I've been trying to be mindful of having everybody get a chance to go and experience it and learn. I know at one point Sharon was on a committee, which might be important for her to attend some, but also switch it around. So try to move that number up to where it's a number that we don't violate open meetings by sending people, but where we could possibly send 4 to each one. And that's really minimal costs because we get a pretty good rate to go to them. 3, somewhere in
I
there.
think,
Somewhere in there.
without violating meetings act.
Just so that was one of the directions I had given Scott, and unless I hear objections to being able to send more people to certain things within reason.
Any comments on that?
I agree. I just, for somebody who is gone, I think it's hard to just go once every 5 years and
Yeah.
get much out of it. I think if you can go more often,
Because in fairness, right now, if you rotate 2 and 2 and try to keep it fair among board members that each have that opportunity, it would take about 5 years for
Right.
it to come back around.
and you're always new. There's